if you're signing an NDA in your official capacity as a state legislator and you're saying, I'm basically signing this on behalf of my constituents and I can't talk to them about it, I think that that's, even if it is not legally corrupt, even if it is not legally unethical, I think it is corrupting and unethical, just in a pure political sense. And I think that most people would agree with that.
Welcome to Seriously, the podcast that dives into the baffling.
We can't send them to a prison where there's animals, where there's livestock.
The ridiculous.
Like omelets better than sex.
And downright unbelievable political climate in red states like Louisiana.
So we can't go there. There's no vegan jail.
Seriously. Seriously.
Okay, welcome to Seriously. I'm your host, Michelle, and my co-host Ellie is taking a little bit of a break, but don't despair because today we're going to do an episode that I've been dreading, but also kind of looking forward to at the same time, about Louisiana's data center gold rush. Many of you probably have heard that Meta is building a data center in Richland Parish, so big that it actually is requiring kind of its own gravitational field. This started out as like a $50 billion campus. It's now ballooned into a $250 billion investment. And then we also have Amazon dropping $12 billion in the Shreveport area. SpaceX might be building some sort of rocket spaceport on 130,000 acres of marshland in South Louisiana. And then our governor, Jeff Landry, is calling this the biggest economic turnaround in Louisiana history. But nobody in Baton Rouge can actually tell you what any of this is actually costing. And then we're going to add to that non-disclosure agreements. So today we're asking, what is this actually costing us in Louisiana and who gets to know about it? So joining us is Jackson Voss, the Government Affairs and Policy Coordinator for the Alliance for Affordable Energy, one of the few people who's been in the room and in the fight on the taxpayer, ratepayer side of this. Jackson is genuinely one of the smartest people that I know, and I'm super thrilled to be having this conversation with him. So Jackson, welcome to the podcast.
Thrilled to be here. Very excited to be with one of the other smartest people I know. So always glad to finally get a chance to join. I watch clips all the time, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, totally. Well, because this whole episode is kind of one big seriously moment, we're going to skip our kind of weekly rundown of all the dumb shit that the Trump administration has done recently and just jump right into our topic because we have a lot to cover.
That sounds great. And we can mention some of the Trump administration stuff too, because it definitely has it plays a contributing role here without a doubt.
There's some crossover, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Louisiana has become one of the biggest AI data center hotspots in the country. So tell us a little bit about some of what's going on the Amazon thing, but I think the big one that is creating most of the controversy is this Richland Parish Meta Center.
Yes. So it's an interesting story. And I think that it is, it's one of these things that has really unfolded. And Michelle, you mentioned this already, like the NDA part of the story. It actually starts like from the very beginning. And we had some really good New York Times reporting about this recently, but we've also had a lot of good local reporting. I would say some of the local reporting presented it almost like it was a good thing. I think the New York Times reporting was a little bit more critical of whether or not this secrecy, the veil of secrecy around this is a good thing. And I think there's been a lot of other good local journalism that's been about how the NDAs have been used and how that's not a good thing. So I think, there's a lot of ground to cover. But I think that what has essentially happened here is that Jeff Landry took office in January of 2024. Before that happened, or as that was happening, Entergy, the utility company that serves several million people in Louisiana, it's one of our largest investor-owned utilities. It's a huge company, one of the only Fortune 500 companies based in New Orleans. So it's very powerful politically here as well. But Entergy was engaging in conversations with Meta, the company that owns Facebook and now Instagram and WhatsApp. And so Meta is in this, basically what I would say, like this AI arms race with all these other big Silicon Valley tech companies, right? And I think that the best way to understand what's happening right now is that there is a rush on the part of all these companies, whether we're talking about OpenAI or Anthropic or Microsoft, Google, all these major players in the internet space trying to build out data centers to power their AI programs. And Louisiana, Meta was aware of this plot of land in Richland Parish, the farmland that had come under the ownership of the state. And they knew that it had been like an economic development site for many decades now at this point. And they said, we have this big plot of land. We can provide you all the electricity you need. We just need to build as many gas plants as the Public Service Commission will let us build. And we'll just take it from there is essentially how that conversation went, which led to at Washington Mardi Gras. For anybody who's not familiar, and I think that y'all probably talked about Washington Mardi Gras on this podcast before. So I'd be surprised.
I think it's
here.
come up, but we haven't. We should do a deep dive into Washington
I was
Mardi
gonna
Gras.
say it can be its own episode because it's a whole can of worms. But I think Washington Mardi Gras is a place where a lot of lobbying happens behind the scenes.
Right.
And so Meta and Entergy approached the governor and his team at Washington Mardi Gras, and specifically approached I believe the Secretary of Economic Development. They were all had just taken office at this point. And this is in 2024, and they said, we want to build this huge data center in North Louisiana on this plot of land. We've already talked to Entergy about it. How do we make this happen? And by how do we make this happen, what Meta really meant was, we need you to change your state laws to provide huge tax giveaways to data centers, specifically like the ones that we get in places like Virginia and other states, so that we will consider building this huge data center complex in North Louisiana. And things have just kind of taken off from there. And that's really where that story begins, though, is really Entergy approaching Meta, apparently, and then approaching the governor's office and saying, we want to make this huge investment, build what was at the time the biggest proposed data center in the world.
Wow. So enemy of the pod state Senator Jay Morris is also part of this story, right? So Jay Morris, our listeners will know, we've done a lot of coverage on him, and he really did help pave the way for this, lobbying for the Public Service Commission to approve these projects. He's co-sponsored bills to enable these land deals between Meta and the state. He's supported by voting yes on bills providing these companies with these tax breaks, which we'll get into. And also, Jay Morris and his partners sold hundreds of acres to Entergy so that they could build these power plants to provide electricity for these data centers, which, like, I'm not a lawyer. I know you are studying to be one, but that kind of seems like a huge violation of state ethics laws.
Yeah, I think this is definitely raises some concerns, right?
Yeah, but I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of this, but also it's complicated and convoluted, and for people that haven't really followed it closely, how do these data centers actually impact the energy bills of people in Louisiana?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I think there's two parts of it really to answer it, is to understand what is a data center and how does it actually function, and then also how does our regulatory system work. I think I'll actually start with the second half first, because I think this will help explain, like, why does it impact me at all? Why does it matter if Meta gets added to the grid, or anybody getting added to the grid, right? So in Louisiana, we still use, and most states still use some form of this, but Louisiana kind of sticks to the oldest version of it, what we call the regulated monopoly model of utility provision. So in Louisiana, unlike, for instance, Texas, which is its own, it's really like the opposite in every way of Louisiana from a regulatory perspective. What I would call is as near perfect a deregulated system as you can get. And by perfect, I mean the most unregulated you get, not that it is a perfect system. Right. And so they have lots of problems of their own. We also have lots of problems, but we are come from it from two very different directions. In Louisiana, you do not get to choose who provides your electricity. You have that chosen for you, and it is either going to be coming from a local cooperative if there's not a investor-owned utility in your area, or it's going to come from a municipal utility. So if you live in Lafayette, Alexandria, the city is actually providing your power with its own city-owned power plant, basically, or its own utility services. And then in other places, New Orleans, but also much of the state, is covered by these investor-owned utilities, right? And so we have several of them in the state: Entergy Louisiana, Entergy New Orleans, Clico, and I'm forgetting somebody, but we'll come back to it. So I think that there's these investor-owned utilities, and these are the utilities that are like for-profit corporations, right?
Right.
They sell you electricity, and in exchange for you having no choice of being their customer, they have to provide you the best possible service, in theory. In exchange for, they get the opportunity to collect a guaranteed profit. right? So it is not as big a profit as it could have been if it was a wholly unregulated system, but they get a guaranteed profit as the idea in exchange for providing you the best possible services and doing right by you, the customer. And the people responsible for ensuring that relationship is upheld is the Louisiana Public Service Commission. The Louisiana Public Service Commission is an elected body of 5 members that represents 5 districts across the state that are similar but not quite the same as the congressional map. There's one more congressional district than there is PSC seats. So these are actually seats that represent slightly more people than our members of Congress do in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
They have 5 members. Right now it's 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans. The Public Service Commission is the one who decides when Entergy, for instance, says, in order to better serve our customers, we need to make a big investment in a new power plant or in a new transmission line. They come to the Public Service Commission and they make their case for that. And essentially, through the process, the Public Service Commission eventually decides this is in the best interest of the ratepayers, the customers. So we are going to allow Entergy to build this, and they're going to be able to add the cost of building that back to your monthly utility bill. Right. And so in Louisiana, when you pay your utility bill, you're not only paying for the price of the electricity, you're paying for the price of the fuel used to make that electricity. So if it's coming from a natural gas fire plant, you're paying for the gas in that power plant that's producing the electricity rather. And then you're also paying for the infrastructure costs. And actually in Louisiana, a big driver for utility bills going up, which have done so continuously over the last decade, big driver that has been storm costs, right? So fees that are supposed to be put towards hardening infrastructure, making it stronger and better able to withstand storms. It's also important to mention that while this is happening, the system is becoming measurably less reliable under Entergy specifically. So that's not actually the hardening doesn't seem to be working. But at the same time, Entergy is making record profits every year after year. They continue to make more and more money, and they're doing especially well right now with this Meta deal going on. So I just want people to understand that the Public Service Commission is responsible for making sure that the utilities use the money that they charge you the right way. And some of that can include profit, but most of it is supposed to be making sure that you're getting the best services possible, which means that if you're not getting the best services possible, but utilities like Entergy are making record profits, something is not happening in the middle that's supposed to be. So that's the first part of the story, right? It's the regulatory side. The second part of this is like what data center. Why did data centers add cost of the grid? The answer is because data centers use enormous amounts of electricity. And I mean enormous amounts of electricity. The campus in North Louisiana that we're talking about, the latest announcements, they want to build 10 gas-fired power plants in North Louisiana, across the state, but all of it will be used to provide the electricity necessary to offset how much electricity is required by this Meta data center. At least that's what Entergy is arguing and what Meta is saying that they need. And so the cost increase to everybody else is because of the way that our model works. When you add 10 gas-fired power plants to the grid, some of those costs might be covered by Meta. And there's an agreement between Meta and Entergy that we don't know the full details of because it's hidden behind confidentiality. Elected officials are signing NDAs. There's a lot of secrecy involved. And Meta is not formally part of the process of the PSC, which is a whole other issue, but is also contributing to this problem in that it limits our ability to know what exactly happens if, for instance, Meta steps out of the deal, or if Meta sells the data center, or if something else changes. We don't really know. But the fact of the matter is when you add 10 gas-fired power plants to the grid, those costs have to be paid for somewhere. And the Public Service Commission gets to decide whether or not you and I are on the hook or just Meta's on the hook or who's going to pay for what when this all happens and whatever happens, whether it goes the best case scenario or something else happens. The deal between Meta and Entergy right now for the first 3 gas plants that have been approved is for 15 years. This new deal that they're trying to get for the additional 7 gas-fired power plants is 20 years. But gas-fired power plants have a lifespan of between 35 and 50 years, right? So there's at least 25 to 30 years unaccounted for. And so I think we need to, part of the issue that we have now, and for the organization I work with, is trying to make sure people understand somebody's going to pay for these gas plants at some point. It's probably not going to just be Meta. And that's what's going to cause your electric bill to go up.
Wow. Okay. All right. I want to talk about a little bit about Landry's like sales tax exemption nonsense. Okay. So Landry signed a 20-year sales tax exemption late in 2024. So sort of seeing what was coming down the road, having had all of these conversations in early 2024. And like, again, nobody actually knows what the total cost of this is going to be. I mean, even the state admits this. Our Department of Revenue has told reporters it can't estimate the future costs that the data center tax breaks would incur because there's no kind of historical data to base those projections on. But some estimates are that, like, just in this year, it would be $1.68 billion in lost sales tax revenue. And then that goes up to $1.71 billion in 2027.
Mhm.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about like how we got here, because this tax incentive originally had nothing to do with these data centers, right? Like
Correct.
this began as a rebate for companies to build like fiber optic broadband to serve underserved rural areas.
Right.
But now it's being repurposed to give these data centers, these tax breaks.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is going
Yeah.
on with this?
Yeah. It's a great question. So this also all happened in 2024, by the way, and nobody knew quite why it was happening because all these people had signed NDAs. And so the piece of legislation, I don't remember the bill number off the top of my head. I can go find it. But I think there was a piece of legislation, exactly what you described. It was intended to be a rebate program to support rural broadband build out in communities that don't have access to reliable internet. So initially the bill was one that actually the Alliance was like, sounds great.
Mhm.
It wasn't not an issue. It was, and these are actually not my words. These are the words being used by the Landry administration. Is we hijacked the bill, and that is something that happens, right? The legislature, somebody's bill will get hijacked. Will be basically they'll take a bill, take out everything that was inside that bill, put in new information that is maybe germane, maybe not.
Mhm.
But in this case, was they took out the rebate program for rural broadband. Instead, they stuck in a huge. Initially, they actually did this. They changed it, wouldn't change it a second time, but the first time around, it all ended up becoming a very generous sales tax exemption program for data centers being constructed in Louisiana that already have the support of LED. And that is what it is now, right? It is a huge sales tax exemption program where, in addition to whatever other agreements are made between LED and the state and local governments with a big data center developer, it basically allows them to take a sales tax exemption and apply it to anything other than office supplies. And I think the reason that that's important to understand is, at first, I don't really know how much office work is actually happening at a data center, so I don't know how relevant that is. It also is not usually not the most expensive thing. It does mean it covers anything having to do with building and the construction of the data center. It also means that it exempts sales for any purchases of things like computer chips, for instance, that you would put into the data center. So the way that these programs work, and they have these programs that have a similar, almost an identical version of this policy in Virginia and in Georgia, and in, I believe Texas has one like this now too, but also in New Jersey. New Jersey actually just stopped theirs, I believe. They like cut it off. Virginia tried, there was a whole revolt about it recently. These things are becoming prohibitively expensive for these state governments. They're costing them
Yeah.
billions of dollars a year. And if Meta is going to be buying billions of dollars of computer chips and putting them in this data center in North Louisiana, and they're going to be refreshing those chips every few years whenever the technology improves, and they're not going to pay any sales tax on those either for like the next 20 years, it could be billions of dollars every year. I actually saw an estimate from somebody online estimating it if for instance Meta fills this up with as many chips, if they have $6 billion worth of chips that they purchase every year, that's a lot of money that the state of Louisiana is going to be losing out on just from Meta by itself every year. It's a very generous program. It's giving a lot of, and I think that there's a lot being made about the economic development opportunity there. I want to remind people that what a data center really does, though, is that it sits there running 24/7, 365 days a year, just doing whatever the AI programming is requiring of it. And then the jobs associated with that tend to be janitorial, security, to make sure nobody breaks in and steals chips, some grounds people, maybe an engineer maybe a couple of engineers hanging around. Typically, these data centers are not major employers, right? They're
Right.
not like a big job center. They create a lot of jobs during construction, but like after that, it's kind of just a data center that's just running. You
Right.
just have people there to help keep it running.
Yeah. And like, to the extent that there would be some sort of technology jobs, it's not like we're coupling this effort with any sort of robust program to train people in Louisiana to actually be the ones getting those jobs, right?
Right. Meta has set up a training program in Baton Rouge. It sounds like that they've set it up. Actually, this is kind of interesting. I only just learned this about this recently. Meta's training program has been explicitly set up to exclude union labor, which I think is interesting. It sounds like this is something that's happening in other places as well, and that it's not just Meta who's doing stuff like this, but they're essentially trying to do a jobs training program to get around the electricians and the pipe fitters and the steel workers and everybody else who might otherwise benefit from being involved in a project like this. And actually, I would say also, I think from our perspective, like even if you don't like data centers, even if you don't like things like that, and I think I come from this from the perspective of people who also oppose pipelines, right? I think there's lots of concerns around pipelines. One of the things that people will also say though is like, if this is going to be built though, we would want the trade unions building it because we know it's going to be safer
Yeah.
and like better constructed and less harmful, and also benefit people in the community more if the unions are actually involved in the process and able to make contract guarantees and other things built into a project that'll be better for everybody. So all of that to say, like, the jobs aspect is very much in controversy. We're actually at the next meeting of the Public Service Commission. I believe there's going to be a vote on a subpoena that's being issued to try to force Meta to share more hard details about these job guarantees and how real they are and how enforceable they are. And so that is something that's going to be voted on in the Public Service Commission at the August meeting. And so this remains like very much a big issue that's been unresolved.
Yeah. So it doesn't sound like this is the biggest economic boom in state history that Landry is sort of touting it as. It sounds like
Yeah.
the people
It's been great for Entergy shareholders.
Right, exactly. And apparently Senator Jay Morris.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so let's talk about water.
Yes.
Because this is one of the big things that pops off around these data centers is water use. Meta's Richland Parish site is registered to use up to 23 million gallons a day. And that's more water intensive than any other Meta facility in the country. So Meta is saying actually its annual use is probably not going to be anywhere close to that. And then they're also saying, well, this is what the farmland would use to irrigate the farmland, right? But the biggest concern here is that if Meta, comes anywhere close to this maximum allowed rate, there's a huge danger that groundwater levels could drop. And if that happens, then we're going to see land sinking, saltwater intrusion, all these things that we know a lot about in South Louisiana because of how we manage, water in South Louisiana by, pumping it out of areas to prevent flooding, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Because, there's some controversy around is this water usage an actual issue, or is this just something that the environmental groups are using because it is something that resonates with with voters and that people can get really exercised about, and it's easier to message around this than something like how the Public Service Commission regulates, rates that people pay, et cetera. So is the water issue a red herring, or is this a serious issue?
Yeah, I think it's actually a fair question to ask, because I think that historically, like in the big picture of things, the problem in Louisiana has never been that we have too much water or that we don't have enough water, right? It's always been an issue of we have too much water, to the point where under Louisiana state law, it's very unusual to have real water regulations, because the assumption is kind of yeah, if there's extra water, let's find a way to use it or get rid of it. Otherwise, somebody's going to be flooded, right? That is changing. And I do think this is one of the things that people probably have started to feel and notice a little bit. It might be something that they're more aware of now than they might have been in the past, because it's becoming more frequent. Louisiana is experiencing droughts for the first time in my lifetime, and it is experiencing wildfire seasons for the first time. and it's experiencing like very different weather patterns than we're used to. We used to have, I think I remember growing up, like the classic daily mid-afternoon thunderstorm, gentle rain, kind of like nice sprinkling there, maybe for an hour or two, maybe for a few minutes. We don't get as many of those anymore. The
Yeah.
weather patterns are changing because of global climate change. I know that that's a controversial thing in this state right now, but I think it's something that we do have to kind of recognize that there's a lot of good modeling, a lot of good science that tells us why this is happening. The atmosphere is changing. That changes the way that certain things, currents in the ocean, as well as in currents in the atmosphere, move, and that changes how we get our water. We still get a lot of water. Don't get me wrong. Louisiana still
Mhm.
does pretty well on water, especially compared to states out west. But we are experiencing more pronounced droughts and things like that. And so there is like, we're getting to the point now where we have to start really thinking like, do we want to use water for this or that?
Mhm.
The data centers use water for a couple different things. And I think that they probably are right. It's not unusual. It's a standard industry practice to ask for permits that give you way more room than you need. The idea being that, okay, we might actually, if we're asking for 23 million gallons a day, we're actually only planning on using like 10 million a day. But we want that buffer in case something goes wrong. A few things. So what they're using the water for, they're using it to cool down the computer chips. There's like what they'll have in the data centers called a closed loop system, recycled water system. There's, I think, some engineering controversy to how accurate it is to describe it that way. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, at least, I think we can assume it's mostly a closed system, right? Where it's like water goes in, it kind of pumps through, it gets cooled at one point, and then it goes through to cool down all the hot computers, and the hot
Mhm.
water goes back down to get cooled again. So that's one part of the water use, is like the coolant system. The other part of the water use is powering the electricity. So the gas-fired power plants need to also have water involved in order for them to function correctly, and they use a lot of water. And so the power plants will use water to provide the electricity that's providing the cooling, that's providing the also the electricity for the computers themselves and for the cooling system. That is what most of the water would be used for. And then at some point, water gets exchanged, pulled out, and so on. On the issue of whether it's the same as using it on agriculture, I think that my gentle pushback would be, well, when we use water on agriculture, we get a product that we're able
Yeah.
to use, either something we can eat or something we use to make something else. When we put water into AI data centers, we get the opportunity to make deepfakes of people, I guess, or chatbots that convince people to hurt themselves or other people. I have yet to see a really strong, and I'll say this, I think Meta in particular, I don't know what Meta wants to use AI for. I could not tell you. I know that they've been using AI chatbots on their products, that they do like AI predictive software stuff, like to help you maybe use AI to enhance photos that you post online. I don't think that the Meta AI is being used for some profoundly socially beneficial good that I've seen announced so far. So I think I would say the difference between using water for AI versus agriculture remains pretty large.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's helpful for people to understand. All right. I want to circle back on the like ratepayer fight
Mhm.
and dig into that a little bit more because, Landry has promised that residents won't pay for Meta's power needs. He signed some sort of executive order supposedly protecting ratepayers from increased costs related to these, but he's standing right next to like Entergy CEO as he's
Yeah.
signing it.
Right.
So, who knows? All right. So, what's the difference between what he signed, this executive order, and what would actually protect ratepayers in Louisiana?
Great question. And actually, this is where the Trump stuff comes in too, because the president also has a similar pledge, right? This is all based on the ratepayer, the pledge for ratepayer protection or whatever. That all these AI companies and the utilities are starting to sign on to. The reason all these folks are signing on to it and the reason the governors are signing on to it is because none of this is legally enforceable, right? It's a PR stunt. It's intended to make
Mhm.
people feel a little more safe, make them feel like that their elected officials are looking out for them. But the truth is that Jeff Landry doesn't get a say in whether or not your light bill goes up because of Meta or any other AI data center. His executive order does, I think, have some potential impacts on state tax credits and incentives that are controlled by LED, possibly. I think it
Okay.
would require them to find that the data center did not live up to its obligations, which, by the way, is locked behind NDAs. We don't know what's in there, what they're actually obligated for, all the promises that Meta has made the state, and all the promises that Meta has made with Entergy that are not part of the regulatory process is not we don't know what it is, and we don't know how enforceable it is, and we don't know whether or not, I mean, it could happen that Meta does something that we think violates what they said they were going to uphold based on the press releases we've seen, but the governor's office has the NDAs that lets them know whether or not that actually means anything, and then they come back to us and say, like, well, no, actually the agreement that we have with Meta and Entergy, they haven't violated, and we'll just never know what that means or why it doesn't violate it. But all that to say, the governor, the president, none of these people have any say on what your monthly electric bill looks like. The Public Service Commission does. And so none of the public service commissioners or the Public Service Commission as a whole have signed on to any such pledge, right?
Okay.
There is no guarantee from the people who actually decide what your electric bill looks like to actually prevent you from paying those costs. So I think that's something everybody needs to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, you've mentioned the NDAs a couple of times, and we're going to get into that, but I want to talk about another thing that's happening before we dive into the NDAs, which is SpaceX.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is like a whole separate deal that's happening,
Yeah.
sort of in the same, like, Louisiana's going to do whatever it can to land some sort of mega project that the media is going to cover. So we're trying to build a rocket spaceport for SpaceX. Where they want to build this is Pelican Island in Vermilion Parish. So this is coastal marshland. Um, this is land that the state actually owns through some sort of past settlement with Exxon. So already this land has been raped and pillaged by
Yeah.
giant corporations. The footprint for this thing is huge. Like,
Yeah.
it's beyond their complex in Texas, right? So what's the deal? What are we doing to, like, grease the skids here for SpaceX?
Mhm.
Like, what is the legislature doing? What is Landry doing? What's going on with SpaceX?
Yeah. This has been a really it is a little crazy how this is all unfolded, but it's very similar to the whole approach to Meta, right? Everything that led up to it, where it was all very hush hush. Suddenly, there was like 10 bills that appeared in the state legislature at the end of the final deadline to introduce bills for session. And all these bills had to do with aerospace, and everybody was kind of like, well, what does this mean? What does this have to do? There was some weird blog by a real estate guy who kind of caught on to this early on, saying, like, I think SpaceX is trying to move into Vermilion Parish. And like, so the word was starting to get around, and like all these things kind of happened at the same time. But suddenly there was this package of bills. I think they passed a sales tax exemption of the same kind as they did for data centers, but for aerospace. They also added a series of bills that basically will allow them to to arrest people if they don't listen to warnings related to rocket launches. It will consider aerospace facilities to be critical infrastructure, which means that if you are intruding without authorization into proximity of the SpaceX territory, which, for instance, you might do if you're trying to go fishing, that you can be arrested for that. And actually, you can be charged for terrorism for that under a different law that was passed this year at the state legislature. And I can talk more about that too. But I think that's something that people need to be aware of, is anything that's considered critical infrastructure, and that's mostly oil and gas infrastructure, water towers, water infrastructure, but now also aerospace facilities, and maybe also data centers. You can be arrested and charged for terrorism for doing this. And that's 20 years hard labor in Louisiana. They passed a bill that basically exempts aerospace companies from any civil liability if something goes wrong. So, for instance, and this stuff does happen, and I think it's kind of funny sounding, but we shouldn't make light of it too much. If SpaceX launches a rocket and that something goes wrong and debris falls on your house, you can't sue SpaceX in Louisiana. At least to my best of the understanding of the new law that was just passed. They're basically exempted from any damage. Like, they don't have to pay damages for that. You're just kind of out of luck,
You
right?
just hope that your, like, homeowner's policy is going to cover it.
I guess.
Is there
Like,
like a space debris clause in your homeowner's policy? I
You
mean,
got to hope that it's like
you hope
an
it hits a
act of a.
tree and that's what actually damages your
And
house.
maybe you can make the argument that because Elon Musk is so deluded that it's an act of somebody who thinks he's God or something like that. Like I think
Oh,
that
an act of God.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
An act of demagogue.
But I think like this is kind of what they've done, right? They've kind of like they have really rolled out the red carpet in a very substantial way to kind of do everything they can to be as attractive to these aerospace companies. And there's really only two. There's Blue Origin and there's SpaceX. Blue Origin is Jeff Bezos, that's Amazon,
Okay.
former owner and CEO, right? And so those are really the only two private big aerospace companies doing this kind of stuff right now. And so SpaceX appears they want to move into Vermilion Parish. They want to put it on the Gulf Coast, similar to what they've done in Texas. I think part of the reason they've looked for more room and more stuff is because they've actually faced a lot of trouble in Texas. They've been very disruptive to the local environment. It's been very disruptive to especially bird populations, sea turtles, other sensitive species. It's also something that's kind of frustrating for the people who live nearby. Rockets are very cool. I think rockets are very cool. However, living
They're
near
loud.
a rocket launch society is very, very loud. Things shake, things get shaken loose. I can't think of very many places that would be worse than a swamp to put a rocket launch facility, but seems to be what we're trying to do here. And I think that there's going to be a lot of it's a very delicate ecosystem. It's hard to see this being something that works out terribly well for people who live around it or the animals the wildlife, the sportsman paradise that also exists around that area.
So I think I also read that some of the other legislation actually prohibits parishes, municipalities, local governments from like suing or trying to block projects. And then there's also a lot of what we're doing related to this isn't subject to public records law. So
Yeah.
like also inoculating this project from public scrutiny. Um, by the media or otherwise. These bills had bipartisan support. So like
Yeah.
what like
Almost unanimous
what's the
support. I
problem
think a
here?
lot of them. I was going to say unanimous support too. Like it's kind of. I don't know if people quite appreciate it. There are a lot of legislators who I respect, a lot of people who I think in the legislature who mean well. It's deeply, deeply frustrating when these kinds of laws, and also I would say like anything that has to do with state ethics, every single legislator pretty much seems to vote for anything that will make ethics laws weaker, regardless of party and regardless of whether or not they've had trouble with ethics or like are facing outstanding fines or something like that. And then they did the same thing for this economic development stuff. They did the same thing for the data center stuff. I think that there is a serious misapprehension by many members of this legislature, regardless of party. And I think that this is kind of fed by the governor. The governor at one point, I don't know if you remember this, when he was trying to push the Constitutional Convention, this is also very early on, but around the same time as all this meta stuff started, they were trying to push through a Constitutional Convention in the legislature in 2024. And the governor gave a quote saying that it's like when you go to a restaurant, you don't actually want to know how the food's being made in the kitchen.
Do taxpayers have the right to know how those government decisions are made?
Well, I mean, listen, that's a great question. Do they? They elect us with full confidence that we're going to go out there and solve those problems. When we make that decision, those decisions are public. It becomes the policy of the state. But all of the pre-decisions, you don't go into I'll give you a great example. Let me ask you. When you go to a restaurant, you go over there and watch the cook make everything he serves you? No, you just walk into a restaurant, those restaurants that you think serve a great meal, and you order that great meal. You don't want to know what the cook put in there, where he got the ingredients, how many people were involved in cooking it. All you care about is a good meal. That's what the people of this state are looking for. They're looking for elected officials to go out there and to solve their problems.
Turns out that that's like a governing philosophy. It's actually like the way that they approach governing is that you don't need to know. Just trust us or don't. We don't really care either way. But you don't need to know. We're going to do whatever we can to bring in this industry, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of legislators have decided, I guess because not many people voted in 2023, because about half of these legislators got elected without even a single vote being cast for them, right? And I think that's an important part of this
Or without opposition.
without
They
opposition.
ran
Exactly.
unopposed. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that it has led to a governing ethos that says people must not really care. I can kind of do what I think is right. And I think that that's not right. I don't think that's right at all. And I think every time they put up constitutional amendments that everybody votes down, I think they should probably take that as a hint that maybe
Yeah.
their finger's not on the pulse here. But I think that seems to be the approach to a lot of this economic development stuff. It seems to be the approach to anything regarding ethics or transparency, is that people don't really care. They don't really seem to want to know, and why should we let them? And I would say that that's a deeply corrupting point of view. And I think it is going to lead to us a lot of kind of repeating a lot of the same mistakes we've made in the past.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking a lot. I think a lot of us think a lot about in a sort of post-Trump, post-MAGA future, what are some things that we have learned that were not fully codified and explicit, that that you couldn't do, that we need to actually make explicit and put into law. And I think that the same goes here and in Louisiana, probably in a lot of other states as well, is just that they're shifting the rules like in a significant way.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe we should have you back on when we have Ellie on, and we can talk about like the dream of post Landry, post Republican supermajority.
Yeah.
What are some state ethics laws that we need to prioritize above anything else to prevent this kind of nonsense from happening again?
Yeah.
Um,
I'd love that. I'd really love to hear Ellie's thoughts on that too. I think I have a feeling she has some good ideas, but I think that
Yeah.
I find it very discouraging that a lot of people in public office right now just don't seem to think that this stuff matters, and think that almost take it a little bit personally, which I think also find a little bit frustrating, where it's like, it's not really that I'm saying that I don't trust you, but why would any of us just grant the government that kind of that blank check of trust? Like, even really good people in office can make mistakes and do the wrong thing sometimes. And the purpose of the ethics laws and the purpose of transparency is to make sure when that happens that we know what we need to do to fix it. Right?
Right.
That's like part of why this whole thing exists, is it's an apparatus to make sure that we're protected from greed and corruption and selfishness, but also like to protect ourselves from when mistakes get made. And so we understand like why a mistake was made and whether somebody is responsible for it, or if it was truly like an instance of negligence, or if it was just like a freak accident. Transparency can account for all those things. And I can understand that can be scary for somebody who might be held accountable, but you shouldn't be running for office if you're not willing to be held accountable. You shouldn't be
Yeah.
running for office and serving these positions if you're not willing to put your name on it and say like, I made this choice and there are consequences to making choices.
Yeah. I mean, democracies only work if the people that the body politic are electing are actually accountable, and
Yeah.
that the voters can know what these people are doing
Yeah.
and how they're being influenced and what's going on. Well, to that end, let's get into these non-disclosure agreements,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
this
Absolutely.
is wild. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna set some stuff up. All right. So from what I understand, Landry personally signed an NDA with Meta. His press secretary also has signed a separate NDA, and isn't allowed to talk about the company at all without the company's express permission. And then we have, I don't like, some extraordinary percentage of our legislature have signed NDAs. And then, Meta saying, well, this is like standard practice. Landry signed his NDA with Meta in April of 2024. So this was right after that Washington Mardi Gras, I guess, that you're talking about. The terms of these are like indefinite. This is just basically like till the end of time, not just covering
Right.
while they're in decision-making positions. A lot of these legislators, in fact, most of them sit on committees where this legislation
Right.
is being considered. This could potentially benefit these projects. I guess my first question to you is like, how does an organization like yours even do its job
Yeah.
when like a lot of what's underlying these contracts, these agreements, these deals between Meta and the government, Meta and landowners, Meta and energy are like shrouded in secrecy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the answer is it makes our jobs a lot harder. And also, I think but also I think the other thing, and maybe this is maybe a warning to issue from this podcast, is not only does it make our jobs harder, but it makes the only recourse we have saying your elected official, you elected official signed an NDA to hide this from your constituents. And all we can say is, look at this guy, ask him questions, because he's hiding information from you on your behalf in his official role as a state legislator. And I think the name of your podcast is a good plug here. It's like, seriously, like what are y'all thinking? What are you doing? I don't know if they think they're signing it in their private capacity, like as citizens. I don't think they think that. I don't think that. I think that the only reason they're being approached to sign NDAs is because they are elected officials. It is not a standard practice. I know that Meta is saying that now, but like the state of Louisiana did not have elected officials sign NDAs for these sorts of economic development projects in the past. I think that the reporting has shown that there was like maybe a couple of LED signed NDAs for economic development projects that did not necessarily extend past, to elected officials. But I think that like even those couple give me pause, because it's kind of like, these are people who work for the state, and you're basically discussing in secret what kind of things you might give from the state, from us, from the people of the state, to these corporations. Whenever I have a concern about ratepayer protection or consumer protection in Louisiana, I don't get to go to a state official and say, let's sign an NDA so that we can talk about strategy. Like you don't get to, when you get to go talk about reproductive justice stuff, you don't get to do that to protect yourself, because it's not really something that one needs to exist, right? The advocacy that we do
No,
is,
I mean, we assume all of the emails and text messages that we exchange with legislators during the course of, our advocacy work are
right.
subject to public records.
Well, I was going to say, and like the things that we're advocating for, the changes in public policy that would affect everyone in the state, whenever we're advocating for that, part of the reason we do it is because we want people to know about what we're working on. We want people to understand the issues that impact them, and how the policy changes that we're advocating for will positively impact them. The NDA is kind of saying, like, not only does the public not need to know about the changes in public policy that we're seeking, it's actually not any of their business. This is really between me and you, the elected official, me and you and Meta, right? And I think that that's just a total inversion of democracy in a fundamental way. Because if you're signing an NDA in your official capacity as a state legislator, and you're saying, I'm basically signing this on behalf of my constituents and I can't talk to them about it, I think that that's, even if it is not legally corrupt, even if it is not legally unethical, I think it is corrupting and unethical, just in a pure political sense. And I think that most people would agree with that.
I agree with that. I also just do want to note that Landry's former policy director, Millard Mule, left the administration earlier this year and is now lobbying for Meta. So there's this, other revolving door thing. And because we have term limits in Louisiana, I mean, I can't help just to be suspicious that a lot of these people are doing whatever they need to ingratiate themselves with these companies while being a public servant, because they're kind of hoping that they are getting a foot in the door somehow and are going to be able to make a lot more than the $16,000 a year they're making representing their constituents. The effort to shroud everything that the Landry administration is doing in secrecy extends far beyond just these projects, because there was reporting that more than 100 staffers in Landry's administration, I mean, these are like everyone from administrative assistants to the head of the Department of Environmental Quality, have also signed these employee confidentiality agreements as a condition of working for him, and that bars them from disclosing any info about the governor's office. They can actually, these agreements say that they can be sued even after they leave the governor's office. They can be fired for violations. I mean, I have never seen anything like this, like a public officer basically issuing gag orders on their staff. I mean, this seems like a very, very, very clear violation of public records law.
I think so. And I think even if it isn't, it is meant to encourage violations of public records law. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
it is an attempt, at the very least, by the governor to make sure that his staff put as little in writing as possible.
Mhm.
Don't go through normal chains of communication. Don't use normal means of communication that a public official would be expected to make and use. And I think you could frame that as we're trying to encourage discretion, but you could also just, I think the way that you described it is actually what it is it's a gag order, right? And
Yeah.
like it's intended to, and I think it can be hard for people to appreciate how important like the public records aspect is because I think most people may not interact with public records that often. But I guess the way the way that I would frame it up is like if there's not a public record of how a decision gets made, and there's not a public record of how a negotiation was made or how anything relating to public policy is made, then not only does it make it harder to change things or to
Mhm.
understand why something changed, it also conceals things that might be much more serious,
Yeah.
right? So I think you mentioned like the revolving door out of the Landry office. Are there members of the Landry administration who are making investment decisions based on the information that they are claiming is privileged based on their being held by this NDA with the governor's office? Are there people making money off of state government doing that? Are there people making special deals where they help negotiate this on the inside and then they go outside, become a lobbyist or a consultant, and they go to work for whichever firm they helped to hook up with the governor's office?
Mhm.
Who is making what decisions when and where, and who is helping to make those decisions? Who's in the room when those decisions are being made at all? If we don't have public records of these things, then there's no way for us to know, but there's also no way for us to hold people accountable
Mhm.
if something is being done wrong. And I think that it just opens the door to a whole lot of other risks, and also just kind of it is again part of this corrupting influence that really undermines the whole system, where it's like there is not only no reason to participate in this shared governance that we're supposed to have as a democracy, but also like it's not shared at all. It is like it is a battle to see who can accrue the most benefit from being in office possible, and that is just going to leave all of us worse off.
Yeah. One thing that I came across when I was looking into this is something that happened with Billy Nungusser. So
Mhm,
Nungusser is our lieutenant governor. Basically, his job is just to try to increase tourism to
mhm,
Louisiana. So he spends a lot of time. We talked about this. I don't know if you remember that conversation. We talked about this while waiting for the endless redistricting hearings, like out in the hallway outside the Senate committee room. But yeah, so that's Nungusser's job. But he was asked to and end up signing an NDA just to be part of some
yeah,
conversations about this golf tournament. So this turned out to be a golf tournament league backed by Saudi Arabia, like a Saudi Arabian wealth fund
mhm,
worth billions of dollars. And then following those discussions at Landry's request, the legislature allocated $7 million to fund hosting that
yeah,
event. And we have no idea like what the deal was. I don't know why a Saudi Arabian wealth fund doesn't have the money. Like they don't have $7 million to fund their own goddamn event. Like
right.
we have to spend that money. I mean,
I guarantee that wealth fund has that money in
okay.
the state of Louisiana. Yeah, I think that I like it. Just
Yeah.
kind of is mind boggling.
I did want to note some pushback to this NDA nonsense
Hmm.
coming from an unlikely place. So, State Representative Danny McCormick, our listeners have heard about Danny McCormick. He is the one who introduced the abortion as homicide, and we should throw everybody in jail or maybe even give them the death penalty for having an abortion a couple of years ago. So, he represents a rural district in Caddo Parish. This is where the Amazon data center is going to be built. And he was asked about being asked to sign an NDA. He refused to do so. And he was very clear about it. He was like, they don't want the little people to know what they're doing until after they've done it.
Yeah,
So, some of these sort of QAnon super MAGA deep state conspiracy theorists, like they see what's going on
yeah.
because that is what they have been warning about, even though who they thought were the the ones that they should be worried about are actually the people in their own damn party.
Yeah, I think Danny McCormick, what a guy. What a guy. I think that I will say this, he is at least very consistent, and I think that I respect that about him.
Yeah.
Highly principled in a way that I find refreshing when it's not directed in the most harmful way possible, which it
Yeah.
may be more often than people realize on certain things like this. I would say he's been very good about this. He's actually very good about like being opposed to government surveillance of people too. I think that's another thing I'd strongly commend him on. I do think that the way he talked about it and the reason he didn't sign the NDA is what should the bare minimum that should be expected from every state legislator, every elected official in this state. There's no reason to be signing NDAs with major corporations for the purposes of economic development. Like I
Yeah.
can't think of a single reason why that would have to be the case.
Yeah.
Because it's about making a deal for bringing this company to the state. They should be able to defend the deal on the merits. They should be able to say, here's the benefits, here are the costs. Now you decide. That should not be a secret. And I think that
No.
Danny McCormick said it well.
I agree. But, this is Landry's playbook. This is what he wants. He wants tax breaks. He wants these land deals. He wants these NDAs.
Yeah.
He wants laws that block the public from being able to sue, get public records about any
Mhm.
project that's happening in their own backyard. Um, okay. This has been super helpful. I have two questions for
Yeah.
you. If you could force one piece of information into public view tomorrow, what would that be
Mhm.
to like move this conversation the most?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is, I guess it's a piece of information that includes a lot of information. I really think whatever deal exists between Meta and Entergy should be publicly available in full. And I think that I would say that for a few reasons, which is that there is there are many reasons that they're trying to keep it between themselves, and they've been fighting tooth and nail to prevent any light being shed on anything between Meta and Entergy. And they've succeeded on some. The subpoena on in the PSC meeting that's going to happen, the Public Service Commission meeting that's going to happen soon, might be another kind of round of this. But I think that there are so many. They're basically hiding it behind the idea that this is a deal between two private companies, right?
Mhm.
That this is just a pure business deal. But we know that that's not true because even if they are private companies, Entergy is a public utility, like under state law, right? It doesn't matter that they're privately owned. They provide a public service to the public. And the public service they provide, based on the decisions being made between them and Meta, are going to shape public policy and also going to impact way more than just Meta.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things we just don't know. And they've been hiding behind this idea that it's because it's a deal between these two companies and it's not really any of our business. And I just think that's not true.
Yeah. Just to like kind of make this more clear for our listeners, one of the big concerns here would be that we have no idea what the negotiation is about who's going to be paying for the infrastructure that
Mhm.
Entergy is building. If their agreement with Meta is like Meta doesn't pay shit and this all gets passed on to the ratepayers, like, that's we don't know that.
We also don't know what happens if Meta sells or they pull out. I
Yeah.
think that you remember the metaverse.
Yeah.
Do you remember this whole thing where it was like they were like we're gonna be a competitor to Zoom. We're gonna create like an online, like almost kind of like you create little digital avatars. None of them had legs. People made fun of that. It was kind of funny for a little while. Meta invested $80 billion, something like that, into the metaverse, and then it pulled the plug on it 5 years
Mm.
later, right? I think these companies move very fast and they make very expensive decisions very quickly, and they sometimes decide it's time to cut loose. Like it's
Mhm.
can be very rapid. We don't know what happens if Meta pulls out of this deal. We don't know what the impacts would be to everybody. We do know that Meta has done everything possible to limit its personal risk so that it's not the one paying. It'll be other people paying. And I do think that the utility customers in Louisiana could be on the hook for quite a lot if something does not work out.
Yeah. Okay. My last question for you is who is the enemy number one here that people can like focus their protest, their ire, their energy towards?
I got 5 of them for you. And actually,
Okay. All right.
I'll
Five's
say
good. Let's do it.
Say 5 of them, but I'll say one of them you can probably count on to do the right thing. The 5 members of the Louisiana Public Service Commission are the people who are going to
Okay.
make decisions. And I think that that's who I would strongly encourage you. If you don't know who your public service commissioner is, please go look it up. If you live in North Louisiana, basically anywhere north of Alexandria, you're probably represented by Foster Campbell. Please call Foster Campbell. Tell him don't approve this deal by Meta. Make it the regular process. If you live in Southwest Louisiana, anywhere west of Lafayette, basically, and south of Alexandria, you probably are in Mike Francis's district. Please call Mike Francis and tell him about your concerns about data centers. JP Couson, he represents basically Baton Rouge to Lafayette and a little bit south. The coastal parishes a little bit, Lafourche, Terrebonne a little bit. Please call Commissioner Couson, and then Eric Scrametta, who represents the North Shore and then kind of the New Orleans suburbs. Same. Commissioner Lewis, Devontae Lewis, he's a friend, but he also is somebody who has been, I think, very consistent and principled on this. I think he has kind of put his foot down several times and said that the process that they're using to approve these gas plants for Meta has been the wrong process. I would encourage everybody to tell their commissioners that they think they should be voting more like Commissioner Lewis on this. The final vote for the last 7 gas plants, and we didn't get into all of this, but I want to be very clear. 10 new gas plants is kind of insane. It's an unprecedented amount of new gas plant being built. They're doing it. They're trying to approve the whole thing in 2 years, which is also crazy. And they're doing it in a way that means that we don't actually know if this is the best deal possible for customers. We feel very strongly that it almost certainly is not, because gas plants are incredibly expensive. There's probably much cheaper and cleaner ways for us to provide electricity needs if Meta builds a data center, or if we have other data centers. The truth is that we can probably power data centers without gas-fired power plants in a way that's more sustainable, better for everybody. But that's not the discussion that's being had right now, and that's why the commission needs to vote no on the current process and start over fresh using the proper procedure.
That's great. Okay. Well, we'll put some information in the show notes about how people can see what this Public Service Commission is doing, find out who their commissioner is, and how to contact them. Jackson, this has been a pleasure. I enjoyed preparing for this because it's been in the background. I know you and a lot of other people have been working on this, a lot of our coalition partners, but this is not a core issue for Lift Louisiana. So it's hard to pay attention. So I appreciate just the opportunity to look into this and get you to help explain it to me. And I'm sure that our listeners will also really appreciate knowing more about what the fuck is going on here.
Absolutely. I wish better news was available to us, but we still have a chance to fix some of this stuff. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you talking to me about it.
Well, we will have you back on. I would love to have this, what can we do to fix ethics
Yeah.
laws in Louisiana discussion? Because we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I mean, Landry he fancies himself a little Huey P. Long, right?
Yeah.
He's running the Huey playbook. He's running around making deals that are good for the companies and bad for the people in Louisiana. Folks need to understand that the reason that Louisiana is one of the biggest producers of oil and gas, and we have not benefited from that financially at all, is because of deals that Huey made, going to DC and making deals that were good for oil and gas production and really shitty in perpetuity for the people of Louisiana, who never saw really a dime from any of that, and instead just saw massive environmental destruction and, just corruption. So we need to learn from our past mistakes.
Yeah. Except no free textbooks and no better roads and no electricity. I would say, I think that's right, though. I think I would say it is a sad echo of what we've done in the past in all the worst ways, without any of the benefits. And the benefits were limited back then, and they are, I would say, as far as I can tell, maybe non-existent now. It's really frustrating, and there's a lot that our legislators and our leaders need to step up and be a little bit better about. So, yeah.
Yep, indeed. Okay, well, Jackson, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And for our listeners, I'm going to do Ellie's part that she normally does, which is please follow us, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, let other people know about this, and follow us on social media at Lift Louisiana. And we will be back next week. Seriously is presented by Lift Louisiana, a nonprofit organization advocating for reproductive health rights and justice.